thinks he's untouchable. That's the dangerous thing about men who spend 20 years learning how to lie in tailored suits. They stop noticing the people cleaning up after them. The assistants, the wives, the women waiting silently outside conference rooms while fortunes change behind glass doors. 3 months ago, I hired his mistress. Today, she's sitting in the front row of his keynote speech, wearing an access badge connected to every secret account he thought nobody could trace. And in less than an hour, my husband's entire empire is going to collapse in public.
The first thing people noticed about Daniel Mercer was his voice. Low, controlled, patient. The kind of voice investors trusted before they even understood what he was selling. Even after 15 years of marriage, it still unsettled me sometimes. Not because it was comforting. Because it was practiced. The ballroom at the Halcyon Grand smelled like polished marble and burnt espresso when I first realized my husband was lying to me again. Not cheating. That would have been simpler. No, Daniel lied the way some men breathed, quietly, automatically, without visible effort. That morning, he stood near the hotel window adjusting silver cufflinks while Manhattan rain streaked down 40 floors of glass behind him. "You're overthinking this board transition," he said calmly. I watched his reflection instead of his face. The auditors found discrepancies. They found timing issues. That's not the same thing. His tie was navy blue, the expensive one from Milan he only wore during negotiations. Meaning he already knew the outcome of today's meeting. Meaning the conversation was theater. I used to admire how composed he stayed under pressure. Now I understood composure could also be concealment. "Are you sleeping with someone?" I asked. The question slipped into the room so softly it almost disappeared beneath the rain. Daniel paused only once. Tiny. Most people would have missed it. Then he smiled at the mirror. No. Perfect delivery. Not defensive. Not angry. Just clean. That was what made it terrifying. By noon, he was on stage delivering a speech about ethical leadership while 600 executives applauded him like he'd invented integrity itself. I sat beside the wives and investors near the front tables, smiling at the correct moments while giant LED screens projected his face across the ballroom. Transparency, Daniel said smoothly, is the foundation of trust. The audience laughed warmly. Someone clapped too early. And 2 rows ahead of me. A brunette woman lowered her champagne glass without taking her eyes off him. That was the first time I saw Evelyn Cross. She wasn't beautiful in the obvious way. No dramatic entrance, no impossible glamour. She looked careful. Cream silk blouse, minimal jewelry, dark hair pinned loosely at the neck like she'd fixed it in the backseat of a car. But her attention never wandered from Daniel. Not once. And Daniel made the mistake of looking back. Only briefly. Only enough. Still, after 15 years with someone, you'll learn the difference between recognition and possession. That look wasn't accidental. It was familiar. I followed her after the conference ended. Not immediately. Immediately looks emotional. Men like Daniel survive because emotional women are easy to discredit. So I waited. I smiled through cocktails. Shook hands. Pretended to listen to 2 venture capitalists arguing about biotech regulation while watching Evelyn's reflection move through mirrored walls near the elevators. She left alone at 6:12 p.m. No coat despite the rain. Interesting. I gave her exactly 4 minutes before walking outside myself. The city air felt cold enough to sharpen thought. Traffic lights reflected across wet pavement while taxis hissed through puddles beside the curb. Evelyn stood beneath the awning across the street checking her phone. Then Daniel's driver pulled up. Not Daniel. The driver. That mattered. Because drivers know schedules. Mistresses only get drivers when the affair is established. I didn't confront him that night. I cooked sea bass. We opened wine. Daniel sat across from me discussing market expansion while candlelight flickered against the dining room windows. To anyone watching, we looked stable. Affluent. Untouched. But halfway through dinner, he checked his phone under the table. Tiny movement. Reflexive. I watched his jaw tighten for less than a second. Then relax. Problem? I asked. There was that word again. Short, elegant, empty. At 2:14 in the morning, I woke up alone. The sheets beside me were cold. Downstairs, lights spilled faintly beneath his office door. I moved quietly through the hallway. Daniel's voice carried through the crack before I reached it. Can't keep calling this number. Silence. Then softer. You're getting emotional again. My stomach went completely still. Not dropped. Still. Like my body had entered survival mode before my mind caught up. I should have walked away. Most people would. But betrayal changes your hearing. Suddenly, every word feels life-threatening. I said I'd handle Claire, he continued. Pause. Then, no, she doesn't suspect anything important. Important. Not anything. Anything important. I stood there barefoot on hardwood floors while the grandfather clock ticked somewhere behind me in the dark. And for the first time in my marriage, I realized my husband wasn't afraid of hurting me. He was afraid of losing something else. Money, exposure, control. The next morning, I hired a forensic accountant. Not because of the affair, because of the word important. People reveal themselves accidentally when they think they're managing someone weaker than them. And Daniel had just told me something without realizing it. The affair wasn't the secret. It was connected to the secret. Her name surfaced 3 days later. Evelyn Cross, 32. Former executive assistant. Currently operating as an independent consultant through shell contracts linked to Mercer Global Holdings. I stared at the report in my office while late sunlight crawled across the floorboards. Something felt wrong immediately. The payments. They weren't gifts. They were structured. Monthly transfers broken into consulting retainers below mandatory disclosure thresholds. Careful. Professional. Hidden. Which meant Daniel wasn't financing a lover. He was financing silence. That realization changed everything. Because infidelity destroys marriages. Financial crimes destroy lives. I met Evelyn for the first time exactly 2 weeks later. Not at a restaurant. Restaurants create witnesses. I invited her to a charity planning committee instead. Public enough to feel safe. Private enough to observe her. She arrived 10 minutes early. Another detail that mattered. Anxious people arrive late. Controlled people arrive early to study exits. She wore gray this time. No perfume. Minimal makeup. And when she shook my hand, her fingers were freezing. Interesting. Thank you for meeting with me, I said warmly. You came highly recommended. Her smile flickered too fast. I'm surprised you reached out personally. I like knowing the people around my husband's company. That landed. Not visibly. But I saw her throat tighten slightly before she reached for water. Fear. Very small. But real. For the next 40 minutes we discussed donor outreach while rain tapped softly against cafe windows around us. To anyone nearby we looked like two professional women discussing fundraising logistics. But underneath every sentence, we were measuring each other. Evelyn avoided direct questions about Daniel. She redirected smoothly. Too smoothly. Which told me she'd rehearsed this before. Not with me. With herself. People practicing deception build conversational escape routes long before they need them. Then I asked the question that changed the entire game. How long have you worked with my husband? She answered too quickly. About 8 months. Why? Her pupils shifted left immediately afterward. Tiny biological betrayal. I leaned back slowly. Smiled. And how long have you been protecting him? Silence. Real silence this time. The cafe noise seemed to disappear around us. Coffee grinders, distant traffic, muted jazz overhead. All of it faded beneath the look she gave me. Because suddenly, she understood I wasn't there as a wife. I was there as a threat. I think you should leave, Evelyn said quietly. But her voice shook near the end. That mattered too. I folded my napkin carefully onto the table. You know what fascinates me? I said softly. Men like Daniel always think the affair is the risky part. I watched her face carefully. But it never is. Now she looked afraid. Not of me. Of what I knew. I slid a thin folder across the table. She didn't touch it immediately. Inside were copies of offshore transfers connected to one of Daniel's subsidiary accounts. Nothing illegal on its own. Not yet. But enough to make her pulse visible in her neck. He's using your company structure to move money, I said. And if this collapses? I let the sentence hang unfinished. People imagine worse consequences when you don't complete them. He told me everything was protected, she whispered. There it was. Not denial. Dependence. Daniel had convinced her she was safe. Which meant emotionally. She was still loyal. For now. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere over the city. The cafe lights flickered once. And Evelyn finally opened the folder with trembling hands. What do you want from me? She asked. I looked directly at her. Not cruelly. Not triumphantly. Just honestly. I want the truth before he destroys both of us. She stared at me for a very long time after that. Like she was trying to calculate whether I was offering rescue. Or recruitment. The terrifying part? At that moment, even I wasn't completely sure. Because revenge sounds clean in movies. In real life, it starts to rot everyone involved. And sitting across from my husband's secret lover while rain hammered the windows around us, I realized I was about to step into something much darker than betrayal. I was about to dismantle a man who already had contingency plans for losing people. What I didn't know yet, to how far Daniel had prepared for war. If you've ever trusted someone who treated love like a business strategy, you already know how dangerous silence can become. And this was only the beginning. Evelyn didn't contact me for 6 days. Not by phone. Not by email. Nothing. And honestly, I respected that. Because panic makes people reckless. Silence means they're thinking. Meanwhile, Daniel became unusually attentive. That was the first warning sign. Men preparing for exposure often become temporarily generous, softer, more observant. Not from guilt. From surveillance. He started coming home earlier. Asked questions about my schedule. Watched me during conversations like he was listening for hidden meaning beneath ordinary words. One night, while we sat across from each other in our kitchen eating takeout Thai food from white cartons, he smiled suddenly and said, "You seem calmer lately." The noodles in my mouth tasted like cardboard. "Should I be worried?" I asked lightly. His eyes held mine a second too long. "That depends." Then he smiled again. Like it was a joke. It wasn't. 3 days later, my office computer crashed. Completely. No warning. No recovery. My assistant said it found evidence of unauthorized remote access. That was when I stopped underestimating my husband. Because affairs are emotional. But financial crimes, those require systems. Protection. Contingencies. People. That night I sat alone in my parked car beneath an underground garage fluorescent light while rainwater ticked softly against the windshield. My forensic accountant Leonard spoke carefully through the phone speaker. "You need to understand something," he said. "These transfers aren't isolated." I closed my eyes. How bad? Silence first. Then, "Claire, someone's been moving money through inactive medical foundations connected to Mercer Global for at least 4 years. 4 years. I gripped the steering wheel harder. Daniel and I had celebrated our 10th anniversary 4 years ago in Santorini. He renewed our vows overlooking the sea while a violinist played near white stone cliffs at sunset. I remembered thinking no woman in the world could possibly feel safer than I did that night. Funny what memory becomes after betrayal. There's more, Leonard continued carefully. One recurring authorization signature appears on almost every transfer. Pause. Evelyn. The garage suddenly felt airless. Not because I was shocked. Because I finally understood her role. She wasn't just his mistress. She was operational. Trusted. Integrated. Daniel hadn't hidden her from the business. He'd woven her into it. When I got home, the penthouse was dark except for a light spilling beneath Daniel's office door again. Always the office. Always secrets hiding behind soft lighting and expensive wood. I stood outside listening. No phone call this time. Just silence. And something about that silence frightened me more. Because quiet men are usually deciding things. I walked in without knocking. Daniel sat behind his desk reading financial projections on dual monitors. Jazz played softly from hidden speakers near the bookshelf. He looked up calmly. "You're awake. You hacked my office." His expression didn't move. Interesting. "Excuse me?" My computer was accessed remotely. That sounds serious. Still calm. Still polished. I stepped farther inside. "What are you protecting?" That finally reached him. Not visibly at first. But Daniel's fingers stopped moving on the keyboard. Tiny detail. Massive meaning. Then he leaned back slowly in his chair. You've been asking dangerous questions lately. Not denial. Not confusion. Warning. I looked around his office. Family photographs. Awards. Investor plaques. 15 years of carefully manufactured credibility framed in dark walnut and glass. You know what's fascinating? I said quietly. You spent so long building the image of a trustworthy man you forgot what actual trust looks like. His jaw tightened slightly. There's a difference between privacy and paranoia, Claire. And there's a difference between consulting payments and money laundering. Heavy this time. Real. Then Daniel stood. Slowly. No sudden movement. Like a negotiator approaching a fragile deal. He made to stop this. Not angry. Almost tired. That unsettled me more than shouting would have. Because tired people already expect damage. Do you think this is about another woman? He asked softly. It's not. Then explain it. I can't. The honesty hit harder than another lie. Because for the first time, he sounded trapped. He moved toward the bar cart near the windows and poured himself bourbon with steady hands. Outside, the city glowed through rain and fog like something distant and unreachable. There are people involved, he said quietly. People who don't lose politely. I watched him carefully. This wasn't performance anymore. At least not entirely. Fear had entered the room. Small. Controlled it. But there. Are you being threatened? I asked before I could stop myself. Daniel laughed once under his breath. Cold sound. No, Claire. He turned toward me again. I'm the one they call when someone else needs to be threatened. That sentence stayed with me long after I left the office. Not because it sounded powerful. Because it sounded true. And truth spoken casually is usually the most dangerous kind. At 11:47 p.m. my phone vibrated. Unknown number. One message. I'll talk, but not over the phone. 7 p.m. Come alone. Evelyn. The restaurant she chose sat beneath street level in Tribeca, hidden behind an unmarked black door beside a florist shop already closed for the night. The place smelled faintly of candle wax and old wine. Low ceilings. Quiet jazz. The kind of restaurant people choose when they don't want to be photographed. Evelyn was already seated in the corner booth when I arrived. But something had changed. Her composure was gone. Dark circles beneath her eyes. Hands wrapped tightly around untouched tea. And beside her chair sat a leather tote bag bulging with paperwork. My pulse slowed immediately. Evidence. You were right, she said before I even sat down. No greeting. No performance. Just exhaustion. I slid into the booth across from her carefully. How much does he know? That I met you? She nodded. He asked me yesterday if I'd ever betray him. My stomach tightened. What did you say? That depends on what counts as betrayal. For the first time since meeting her. I almost liked her. She opened the tote slowly and removed folders thick with printed statements, contracts, internal memos, and photographs of signed authorization sheets. Years of hidden transactions. Layered companies. Offshore accounts. Some legitimate. Some absolutely not. My eyes moved across pages while conversations around us blurred into background noise. Daniel wasn't just hiding money. He was creating exits, emergency pathways, identity shields, entire financial escape routes. My husband had been preparing to disappear long before I discovered the affair. "Why are you helping me?" I asked quietly. Evelyn stared down at her tea. "Because 2 months ago another employee vanished." I stopped reading. "What?" "She handled compliance reviews." Evelyn swallowed hard. Then suddenly she resigned. "You think Daniel hurt her?" "No." Quick answer. Too quick. "That's the problem," she whispered. "I think he handed her to someone worse." The waitress arrived briefly with water. Neither of us touched. When she left, Evelyn leaned closer across the table. "He told me once that loyalty is just fear stretched over time." A chill moved through me. That sounds like him. He meant it. Then Evelyn reached into her bag one final time. This time. She hesitated. Fear visibly climbed into her expression. "What is it?" I asked. She slid a small silver flash drive across the table. "I wasn't supposed to find this." I looked at the drive but didn't touch it yet. "What's on it?" "Recordings." "Of what?" Her eyes finally met mine fully. "Meetings." Pause. "And your husband discussing how to survive federal investigations." The restaurant suddenly felt unbearably warm. Somewhere behind us, glasses clinked softly while a couple laughed at the bar. Normal life continuing inches away from catastrophe. I lowered my voice carefully. "Who was he talking to?" Evelyn looked toward the entrance instinctively before answering. "That's why I'm scared." A long pause. Then, I don't know. We left separately 30 minutes later. Carefully. No direct eye contact outside. No visible connection. Rain had stopped by then, leaving the streets slick with reflected neon and taxi lights. I walked 3 blocks before checking whether anyone followed me. Then 5 more. By the time I reached my car, my heartbeat had settled enough to think clearly again. That's when I noticed the envelope tucked beneath my windshield wiper. Plain white. No stamp. No name. Inside was a single photograph. Me entering the restaurant. Stamped. Taken less than an hour earlier. And written across the bottom in neat black ink were 5 words that turned my blood cold. "You should have stayed loyal." I looked up instantly. Street lights. Passing traffic. Blurred strangers under umbrellas. Anyone could have left it. Anyone could have been watching. And suddenly, for the first time since this started, I understood something terrifying. Daniel wasn't the only one protecting those secrets. Back at the penthouse, the bedroom door was open. Soft light spilled across the hallway carpet. Daniel sat awake on the edge of the bed in partial darkness, still wearing his suit pants and white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. Waiting. He looked up as I entered. "You're home late." His voice sounded gentle, almost affectionate, which somehow made the fear worse. I kept my face neutral. Dinner ran long. With who? There it was. Quiet. Direct. Dangerously calm. I set my purse down slowly. "Why does it matter?" Daniel studied me for several seconds without blinking. Then he stood, walked toward me, and brushed a strand of wet hair behind my ear so carefully it made my skin crawl. Because, he said softly, I don't think you understand how serious this situation actually is. And standing there in our bedroom, with rainwater still cooling on my coat, I realized something that should have terrified me much earlier. I had spent weeks investigating my husband's crimes, but I still had no idea who my husband really worked for. If you think betrayal hurts, wait until you discover the person betraying you is also afraid of someone else. I didn't sleep that night. Daniel did. That was the disturbing part. While I lay awake staring at shifting shadows across the ceiling, my husband slept beside me with the calm breathing of a man who believed control was still recoverable. At 3:11 a.m., I turned carefully toward him in the dark. Even asleep, his face looked composed, disciplined, like tension had been professionally removed from him years ago. I used to think that made him strong. Now I wondered what kind of person practices emotional restraint so completely that fear barely reaches the surface. At 6:40, his phone vibrated on the nightstand. One message. The screen lit briefly before locking again. Daniel opened his eyes instantly. Not groggy. Alert. Military alert. And for the first time in 15 years, I noticed he always woke like that. Like someone expecting emergencies. You're awake early, I said quietly. He reached for the phone too fast. Big presentation. Lie. We both knew it. But something had changed between us now. The lies were no longer hiding beneath the marriage. They were standing openly inside it. He showered. Dressed. Left by 7:15. And the second the elevator doors closed behind him, I moved. Not emotionally. Methodically. Because panic creates mistakes. And Daniel had spent years teaching me exactly how dangerous mistakes could become. His office still smelled faintly of sandalwood and bourbon from the night before. Morning light stretched across polished wood shelves while the city glowed pale gray outside enormous windows. I went straight to his desk. Locked. Of course. But Daniel trusted systems more than people. And people who trust systems eventually become predictable. 3 months earlier, during a dinner party, he'd complained that biometric security failed constantly after hand injuries. I remembered because he'd spent 10 minutes irritated over a cut on his thumb. At the time, I thought he was being dramatic. Now, it gave me access. The backup code was our anniversary. Not our wedding anniversary. The date we met. That hurt more than it should have. Because even now, some part of him still attached security to sentiment. The drawer opened softly. Inside were folders arranged with almost surgical precision. Tax records, property documents, international contracts, and beneath all of it, a second phone. My pulse slowed instantly. Burner phones never contain ordinary conversations. I scrolled carefully. No names. Only initials. Transactions. Schedules. Locations. Then one message thread caught my attention. MK. Recent. Frequent. I opened it. And immediately felt cold. MK, is she contained? Daniel for now? MK, that's not reassuring. Daniel, I'll handle Claire. MK, you said that before. Daniel, she's emotional, not strategic. MK, underestimating wives destroys men faster than investigations. I stared at the screen. Not because of the threat, Because someone out there understood me better than my own husband did. Another message followed hours later. Daniel Evelyn may become unstable. MK, then remove the variable. My stomach tightened violently. Remove the variable. No emotion. No hesitation. Just operational language. Like discussing damaged inventory. I copied everything onto the flash drive Evelyn had given me. Fast and precise. Years of marriage teach you how quickly footsteps can appear behind closed doors. By the time the elevator chimed faintly from the hallway outside, the phone was back exactly where I found it. The drawer closed. The office untouched. And I was standing calmly near the windows holding a coffee mug when Daniel re-entered. He studied me immediately. Always observant. I forgot a folder, he said. I smiled lightly. You're getting forgetful. His eyes lingered on me 1 second too long. Suspicion. Tiny. But growing. By noon, I was sitting inside Leonard's private office 30 floors above Lexington Avenue while he examined the copied files in silence. The room smelled like printer toner and old paper. No music. No decoration. Leonard believed personality distracted from evidence. As he scrolled through the messages, his expression slowly hardened. Finally, he removed his glasses. You need federal protection. The words landed heavily. I almost laughed from exhaustion. That's serious. Claire. He leaned forward carefully. These aren't just fraud protections. Tapped one message. These are containment discussions. I looked down again at the screen. Containment. Remove the variable. Suddenly, the language around me felt different. Sharper. Less corporate. More dangerous. Who's MK? I asked. Leonard hesitated. Bad sign. Then quietly, I think it might be Marcus Kane. The name meant nothing for half a second. Then everything at once. Marcus Kane. Private risk consultant. Former intelligence contractor. The kind of man corporations hired when scandals became existential. Not illegal officially. Just adjacent to things that ruined lives quietly. No, I whispered instinctively. Leonard nodded grimly. I've seen his name connected to offshore containment structures before. Containment again. There was that word. Everywhere. As if human beings had become problems to manage instead of lives to destroy. Outside the office windows, helicopters moved slowly through distant clouds over Manhattan while traffic crawled beneath us like veins carrying pressure through the city. And suddenly my marriage didn't feel personal anymore. It felt institutional. Like Daniel had been absorbed into something colder than greed. You need to disappear for a while, Leonard said carefully. I'm serious. I looked at him. Then shook my head slowly. If I disappear now, Daniel controls the narrative. Claire. He'll paint me unstable. I stood and grabbed my coat. He's already preparing for that. Evelyn called me 2 hours later from a blocked number. Her breathing sounded uneven immediately. Someone was in my apartment. I stopped walking. The sidewalk noise around me blurred instantly. What? They didn't take anything. Fear cracked visibly through her voice now. But things were moved. Tiny pause. My bedroom closet was open. A cold sensation crawled slowly down my spine. Not robbery. Message. Listen to me carefully, I said, lowering my voice. Go somewhere public. I think I'm being followed. Evelyn. I shouldn't have talked to you. Cars rushed past nearby while pedestrians pushed around me through late afternoon crowds. The entire city suddenly felt hostile. I need you calm, I said firmly. Where are you right now? Silence. Then, the parking garage beneath my building. My heart dropped hard. A sharp inhale. Get out of there immediately. Then I heard it. A car door closing through the phone. Evelyn stopped breathing for half a second and whispered, "Oh my God!" The line disconnected. I was already moving before logic caught up. Running toward my car. Ignoring traffic lights. My heels slipping once against wet pavement hard enough to bruise my ankle. People stared. Didn't matter. By the time I reached downtown traffic near her apartment building, rain had started again. Heavy this time. Violent against the windshield. Police lights flashed ahead near the garage entrance. Too many. Far too many. I parked illegally and pushed through gathered pedestrians beneath umbrellas. Someone complained loudly about traffic. Another person filmed on their phone. Modern tragedy always becomes content eventually. Then I saw the ambulance. Rear doors open. Paramedics moving fast. And beneath harsh white emergency lights. I saw Evelyn sitting on the pavement wrapped in a gray blanket. Alive, shaking uncontrollably. Relief hit so hard it almost weakened my knees. I pushed forward immediately. But before I reached her, someone stepped into my path. Male, tall, dark overcoat soaked with rain. Mrs. Mercer. His voice was smooth. Professional. I froze instantly. Not because I recognized him. Because he already knew exactly who I was. He held out a business card calmly. Marcus Kane Risk Management. My blood turned cold. The man smiled politely. Not warm. Not threatening. Worse. Controlled. Miss Cross had a minor panic episode, he said. You safe? I stared at him. Rainwater dripped from his coat sleeves onto concrete between us. You've been watching her. Protecting her. From who? That almost made him smile wider. Consequences. Behind him, Evelyn looked up from the ambulance stretcher. Our eyes met. And immediately I saw it. Terror. Not of Daniel anymore. Of this man. Marcus Kane turned slightly toward the flashing lights. Then back to me. Your husband cares about you very much, Mrs. Mercer. The sentence sounded rehearsed. Corporate. Empty. I don't believe you. That's understandable. Its calmness was unbearable. Then he stepped slightly closer beneath the rain. Not invading space, controlling it. Here's the problem, he said quietly. You're treating this like infidelity. I said nothing. Daniel made mistakes, Marcus continued. But the people connected to those mistakes. A pause. Cannot afford public complications. Complications. Such elegant language for fear. You're threatening me. Another tiny smile. I'm asking you to think realistically. He glanced briefly toward Evelyn. She's frightened. Then toward me. You should be too. An ambulance siren screamed somewhere nearby while rain hammered the pavement around us. And standing there across from Marcus Kane, I finally understood why Daniel had looked afraid in his office. Not scared of prison. Not scared of exposure. Scared of losing control over people far more dangerous than himself. Marcus handed me the business card again. This time I took it. Go home, Claire, he said softly. For everyone's sake. Then he walked away into the rain without waiting for a response. No bodyguards. No dramatics. Just certainty. And somehow, that certainty terrified me more than any direct threat could have. 20 minutes later, Evelyn sat trembling beside me in the back of a hired car while city lights smeared across rain-covered windows outside. She said they'd protect me, she whispered. I turned slowly. She? Evelyn looked pale enough to disappear. Daniel's lawyer. Pause. Then the sentence that changed everything. She told me the wives never survived these scandals. The car suddenly felt too small. Too quiet. What wives? I asked carefully. Evelyn stared ahead without blinking. And in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, You still think you're the first woman this happened to. If betrayal has a hierarchy, the worst level is discovering you were never uniquely targeted. You were simply next in line. I didn't speak for the rest of the drive. Neither did Evelyn. Outside, Manhattan bled into streaks of silver and red beneath the rain while windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the storm. Inside the car, everything felt suspended. Like we'd crossed an invisible threshold neither of us could uncross now. You need to tell me everything, I said finally. Evelyn kept staring ahead. Her mascara had smudged slightly beneath her eyes, but she hadn't tried fixing it. That told me how frightened she really was. Careful women maintain appearances under stress. Terrified women forget themselves completely. I signed an NDA 3 years ago, she whispered. Not for the affair. Then for what? She swallowed hard. For the settlement. A cold sensation moved slowly through my chest. What settlement? Evelyn turned toward me for the first time since leaving the garage. There was another wife before you. My heartbeat stumbled. That's impossible. No, she said quietly. It's hidden. The city lights outside blurred across her face as she spoke. Daniel was engaged before he met you. I stared at her. He told me they separated. Pause. After she accused Mercer Global of financial misconduct. I felt sick instantly. Not because of the accusation. Because I remembered the story perfectly. Daniel told me his former fiancée became emotionally unstable during a difficult business transition. I remembered defending him once at a dinner party when someone hinted otherwise. God. I had defended him. What was her name? I asked. Evelyn hesitated. Another bad sign. Naomi Valley. The name hit something faint in my memory. A photograph, maybe. A newspaper clipping years ago. Dark hair. Sharp smile. Then gone. Like she'd vanished from public life entirely. What happened to her? Evelyn looked back out the window. No one knows. The driver turned onto Park Avenue while rainwater rippled across black pavement beneath us. I tried calling Leonard. Straight to voicemail. Again. Voicemail. A third time. Nothing. My stomach tightened harder. I shouldn't have told you, Evelyn whispered suddenly. You already did. She warned me not to. But before Evelyn answered, my phone vibrated. Daniel. Calling out. The sound alone changed the air inside the car. I stared at the screen while it buzzed in my hand. Once and 3 times. Evelyn looked terrified. Don't answer. I almost ignored it. Then I remembered something Marcus Kane said earlier. You're treating this like infidelity. Meaning the danger wasn't emotional anymore. It was informational. And information only matters when people believe you still have some. So I answered. Daniel's voice sounded calm. Too calm. Where are you? Why? Long pause. Then softly. Because Leonard Walsh is dead. The entire world inside the car stopped moving. Not literally. Emotionally. Like reality itself had slammed into concrete. What? A car accident, Daniel continued quietly. About 20 minutes ago. No. My breathing turned shallow instantly. He worked too much, Daniel said. Always distracted. My hand tightened around the phone so hard it hurt. Do you expect me to believe this is coincidence? No, he replied. Another pause. I expect you to understand escalation. Evelyn grabbed my wrist suddenly. Her face had gone completely white. What happened? She whispered. I couldn't answer. Because in that moment, I realized Daniel wasn't warning me. He was grieving. Not Leonard. The situation. The loss of containment. The unavoidable movement toward collapse. Come home, Daniel said softly through the phone. Before this becomes irreversible. Then he disconnected. The silence afterward felt unbearable. The driver kept moving through traffic while my thoughts spiraled violently against themselves. Leonard was dead. Marcus Kane had approached me publicly. Evelyn was panicking. And somewhere inside all of this, Daniel still believed he could manage the outcome. We need to disappear, Evelyn whispered. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Claire, they killed him. We don't know that. Yes, we do. Her voice cracked hard enough to make the driver glance briefly into the rearview mirror. He warned you. I looked down at my phone again. At Daniel's last call sitting silently on the screen. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I genuinely considered running. But then another realization hit me. If Leonard was dead, then whatever evidence existed outside my possession might already be compromised too. Which meant the only remaining leverage was public exposure. Fast, visible, impossible to quietly erase. Daniel's keynote tomorrow, I said suddenly. Evelyn blinked. What? The Mercer Foundation Summit. Understanding slowly crept across her expression. He'll have investors, press board members. Claire. He cares about perception more than survival. And then I understood the shape of his weakness completely. Daniel could survive investigations, private accusations, settlements. But public humiliation, public collapse, that would destroy the only thing he truly loved. Control. You're talking about exposing him live, I'm talking about removing his ability to rewrite the narrative. Evelyn stared at me in horror. That's exactly what Marcus warned you not to do. And you still want to? I looked out at the rain-covered city, at strangers hurrying beneath umbrellas, completely unaware of how quickly lives could fracture behind expensive glass walls. Then quietly, I think they've been counting on fear for too long. The penthouse was empty when I returned. Daniel never came home after difficult conversations. He preferred controlled environments after conflict. Hotels as private offices. Places with exits. I walked slowly through dark rooms, still carrying traces of our marriage everywhere. Crystal vases. Vacation photographs. Monogrammed towels. Evidence of intimacy layered over corruption so thoroughly they'd become inseparable. In the kitchen, I poured bourbon into a glass with shaking hands. The alcohol burned hard going down. I wanted to feel something sharp enough to cut through the numbness forming around me. That's when I noticed the dining table. One chair slightly pulled out. A folder resting neatly in the center. My name written across the top. Claire. Every instinct told me not to open it. I opened it anyway. Inside were photographs. Dozens. Me leaving meetings. Entering Leonard's office. Speaking with Evelyn. Even tonight outside the parking garage. They'd been documenting me for weeks. Monitoring movement. Building timelines. And beneath the photograph sat a single typed letter. I recognized Daniel's wording instantly before I even finished reading. Controlled. Elegant. Detached. You are not prepared for the people attached to this situation. You believe exposure creates justice. It doesn't. It creates panic. And panic destroys collateral first. Please stop before someone else gets hurt. Collateral. That word hollowed something inside me. Not wife. Not partner. Not someone he loved. Collateral. I sank slowly into the dining chair while city lights flickered beyond enormous windows around me. And suddenly, I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. The night Daniel proposed. We were standing on a rooftop in Chicago during winter, wrapped in borrowed coats while snow fell over the skyline around us. He looked terrified when he asked me to marry him. Surely terrified. At the time, I thought it meant love. Now I wondered if he'd simply been afraid of loneliness. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number this time. One message. No greeting. Just an address in Midtown. Then another message immediately after. If you want the original files on Naomi Vale, come alone. I stared at the screen. Then at the rain outside. Then back toward the folder full of surveillance photographs spread across my dining table. Trap! Obviously. But maybe not Daniel's. And somehow, that possibility frightened me even more. Midnight arrived cold and fog-heavy. The building waiting at the address looked abandoned from the outside. Old financial district architecture. Dark windows. Minimal lighting. The kind of place corporations keep after scandals because nobody remembers they exist. I almost turned back twice. But curiosity is dangerous when mixed with betrayal. It keeps pulling you toward answers long after fear should have stopped you. Inside, the lobby smelled like dust and old paper. One elevator still worked. Barely. Its fluorescent light flickered during the ride upward hard enough to make my pulse quicken. Floor 19. The doors opened slowly. And at first, I thought the entire floor was empty. Then a voice emerged softly from the darkness ahead. You look exactly like she did. Female. Older. Controlled. I froze. A desk lamp clicked on near the far side of the room. And sitting there beside towering stacks of banker boxes was a silver-haired woman I recognized instantly from old Mercer Foundation galas. Vivian Mercer, Daniel's mother? She looked exhausted. Not weak. Worn down in the specific way wealthy families become worn down after years protecting terrible men. I was wondering how long it would take before you started looking for Naomi, she said quietly. My throat tightened. A bitter smile crossed her face. Claire. She gestured toward the boxes surrounding her. I know everything. And sitting there in that dim, abandoned office, staring at the woman who helped build Daniel's empire, I realized the worst betrayal might not come from my husband at all. It might come from the people who spent decades teaching him how to survive consequences. Some families protect their legacy. Others protect their secrets. The Mercer family had confused the two a very long time ago. Vivian Mercer poured tea with perfectly steady hands. That disturbed me immediately. Because women only become that calm around catastrophe after surviving it repeatedly. The abandoned office around us looked frozen in another decade. Dust drifted through dim lamplight while banker boxes filled entire corners of the room like buried evidence waiting to rot quietly. You're not surprised I came, I said. Vivian slid a porcelain cup toward me. Her eyes moved over my face carefully. You've Naomi's instincts. The name again. Heavy now. Real. I didn't touch the tea. I want the truth. Vivian gave a tired smile. No, Claire. A pause. You want clarity. Truth is much uglier. Rain tapped softly against distant windows somewhere in the building, while old fluorescent lights hummed overhead. And then Vivian opened the first box. Inside were legal files. Settlement agreements. Photographs. Internal memos stamped confidential. Years of buried panic disguised as corporate procedure. She wasn't his wife, Vivian said quietly. But Naomi was supposed to become one. My chest tightened. She found the accounts. Vivian nodded once. She thought exposure would stop them. Not Daniel. The distinction mattered. She threatened federal investigators, Vivian continued. Marcus Kane intervened. That name again. Like poison spreading through every layer of this story. What happened to her? Vivian's expression changed slightly. Not guilt. Memory. She disappeared. The room went silent. I stared at her. You're saying that like it's ordinary. No, she said softly. I'm saying it like I survived it. That sentence landed harder than anything else. Because suddenly I understood Vivian Mercer wasn't sitting here as an accomplice. She was sitting here as someone who'd spent decades trapped beside dangerous men and learned survival required selective blindness. How long have you known? A bitter laugh escaped her. About Daniel. She looked down at the files. Since he was 14. Outside, thunder rolled low across the city. Vivian removed an old photograph from one of the folders and slid it toward me. Daniel. young, maybe 16, standing beside his father outside a courthouse, both wearing identical expressions. Controlled, emotionless, predatory. He learned from Richard, Vivian said quietly. Your father-in-law believed fear was more reliable than loyalty. I studied the photograph. Is Richard involved in this? No. A pause. He's dead. Another pause. But his system survived him. That was the first moment I truly understood the Mercer Empire. Not as a company, as inheritance. Secrets passed between men like family heirlooms. Vivian reached into another box and removed a thin black ledger. Older than everything else. Handwritten. Mercer Global used charitable foundations to move protected funds for political clients during the late 90s. I looked up sharply. Illegal clients? Powerful clients. She corrected me carefully. Which is worse? I sat back slowly. Every answer somehow widened the nightmare instead of clarifying it. So Daniel inherited this? He inherited responsibility. Vivian's voice turned colder. And responsibility becomes corruption very quickly when billions depend on silence. Then she looked directly at me. You need to understand something before tomorrow. Tomorrow? The summit. Of course she knew. Everyone was already positioning themselves around it. Like generals before war. Vivian folded her hands together calmly. If Daniel collapses publicly, he won't be the only casualty. There are already casualties. Yes. Her voice sharpened for the first time. And there will be more. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the question I'd been avoiding. Did Daniel kill Leonard? Vivian's eyes closed briefly. Relief tried to enter me. Then she added, but someone used Daniel's panic as permission. Cold moved through my entire body. Because that answer was somehow worse. It meant events were no longer controlled. People around Daniel were now making independent decisions. Cleaning messes before being asked. Marcus Kane? I whispered. Vivian didn't answer immediately. Finally. Marcus believes stability justifies cruelty. I thought about his face in the rain. His calmness. His certainty. And suddenly I realized something terrifying. Marcus Kane probably believed he was the hero. You should leave New York tonight, Vivian said softly. Then at least understand this. She leaned slightly closer across the desk. When men like Marcus lose containment. A pause. They stop distinguishing between threats and witnesses. At 2:13 a.m. I returned home carrying copies of Naomi Vale's files hidden inside my coat. The penthouse was dark. Silent. Silent. Every instinct tightened immediately. Daniel? Nothing. I moved slowly through the hallway. Kitchen empty. Living room dark. Then I noticed light beneath the bedroom door. Daniel sat alone beside the windows when I entered. No television. Just whiskey and city lights. He looked exhausted. Not physically. Morally. Like something inside him had finally started collapsing under its own weight. You met my mother, he said quietly. Not a question. I stayed near the doorway. You had me followed. I had you protected. That's not the same thing. He looked down into his glass. It isn't. For the first time since this began. He sounded honest. And honesty from a liar always arrives too late to feel comforting. I know about Naomi, I said. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Pain crossed his face. Real pain. She shouldn't have come back, he whispered. My stomach turned. Come back? His eyes lifted slowly toward mine. And suddenly, I understood. Naomi wasn't dead. She was alive. Where is she? Daniel stood immediately. Claire. Where is she? She disappeared because Marcus made her afraid. His voice cracked slightly now. She took the settlement and vanished. You expect me to believe that? Wyatt. I expect you to believe I tried to stop what happened after. After. That word mattered. The room felt smaller suddenly. The city beyond the glass impossibly distant. What happened after? Daniel stared at me for a long time before answering. Then finally, Richard ordered surveillance on her. My pulse spiked. She found out. Another pause. And she tried exposing everyone publicly. I already knew where this was going. But before she could, he swallowed hard. Marcus intervened. I looked at him carefully. At the exhaustion beneath his composure. At the fear finally surfacing through years of control. And suddenly I realized something awful. Daniel wasn't evil in the cinematic way people expect. He was weak. Weak enough to protect terrible systems because dismantling them threatened his entire identity. You could have walked away, I whispered. That answer came instantly. Painfully honest. You always think people can walk away from power once they recognize it's corrupt. His eyes looked hollow now. They can't. At 5:40 a.m., the first news vans arrived outside the Mercer Foundation Summit venue. By 7 o'clock, social media already buzzed with rumors about financial irregularities connected to Mercer Global. Someone had leaked pieces early. Not me. Not Evelyn. Meaning another player had entered the board. The ballroom looked almost identical to the one where this nightmare started. Crystal chandeliers. Marble floors. Luxury disguising decay. Executives smiled nervously beneath camera flashes while assistants whispered urgently into headsets near the stage. And everywhere, security. Far more than before. Marcus Kane was preparing for impact. Evelyn sat near the front exactly where we planned. Pale but composed. A hidden earpiece connected her to the cloud archive Leonard helped build before he died. Every file. Every recording. Every transfer. Time for simultaneous release. Public. Permanent. Impossible to quietly erase. You can still stop this, Daniel said beside me backstage. He looked terrible now. Tie loosened slightly. Eyes bloodshot from exhaustion. Can you? I asked. Silence answered first. Then quietly. That was the moment I finally stopped loving him. Not because of the affair. Not even because of the lies. Because he'd surrendered his morality so gradually he no longer recognized its absence. The keynote began at 9 o'clock sharp. Applause filled the ballroom as Daniel stepped onto the stage beneath giant projection screens carrying the Mercer Global logo. Controlled. Elegant. still performing leadership even now. "Good morning," he began smoothly. And for one final moment, he almost looked untouchable again. Then Evelyn pressed send. The first phones buzzed simultaneously across the room. Investors, journalists, board members, notifications exploding everywhere at once, leaked files, audio recordings, offshore accounts, internal discussions. Leonard's archive flooding into public view faster than containment teams could react. The ballroom atmosphere changed instantly. Not loud at first. Burst. Confused. Then frightened. Daniel saw it happening in real time. People lowering phones. Faces changing. Whispers multiplying beneath chandeliers. And across the room, Marcus Kane moved immediately toward the exits. Not toward Daniel. Toward escape. Because survival experts always abandon the scene first. Then the audio began playing through the ballroom speakers. Daniel's voice. Clear. Cold. If exposure happens, protect the structure first. Individuals are replaceable. The room detonated emotionally. Questions erupted everywhere. Cameras lifted. Board members stood abruptly. And for the first time in his life, Daniel Mercer lost control publicly. He looked at me across the chaos. Not angry. Not betrayed. Like a man finally watching the weight of inherited corruption collapse exactly where it was always destined to. Then security rushed the stage. Federal agents entered from side corridors. People shouted. Phones recorded everything. And somewhere inside the panic, Marcus Kane disappeared. Gone before authorities reached him. Of course. Men like him build exits before entrances. Evelyn grabbed my arm near the ballroom doors. We need to leave. She was right. The entire summit had become a feeding frenzy of media, investigators, executives, and frightened investors desperate to save themselves. But before we exited, Daniel's voice stopped me one final time. Blair. I turned. He stood surrounded by federal agents now. No composure left. No performance. Just a man watching his empire die in public. And quietly. Almost gently. He said, I really did love you. The tragedy was... I believed him. 3 months later, Mercer Global officially dissolved under federal investigation. Executives turned on each other almost immediately. Private settlements surfaced. Political names disappeared from boards overnight. Marcus Kane remained missing. Officially. Unofficially. People still whispered his name carefully in certain corporate circles. Like a warning. Evelyn entered witness protection under a sealed agreement. Vivian Mercer vanished from public life entirely. And Daniel? He accepted a plea arrangement that protected dozens of people more powerful than himself. Even at the end. The system survived. Just smaller. Cleaner. Hungrier. I moved to a quiet coastal town nearly a year later. No penthouse. No galas. No private security. Just ocean air and silence that finally felt honest. Some mornings I still wake before sunrise remembering the sound of ballroom applause right before everything collapsed. And sometimes, the hardest part isn't the betrayal. It's realizing how many people already knew the truth and decided comfort mattered more. Last month I received one final envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. Marcus Kane entering a private airport in Geneva. Alive, watching, waiting, and written across the bottom in familiar black ink were 6 words that still haven't stopped haunting me. Empires collapse. Systems adapt. I burned the photograph that night beside the ocean. But even now, sometimes I still wonder whether exposing Daniel changed anything at all. Or whether I simply survived long enough to glimpse how power really protects itself. And honestly, that answer frightens me more than